Advaita Vedanta. Thank you. So what we will be looking at is the text from purely an Advaita perspective. Why it is important that we know this one is, although we are all, most of us, I think, have been with Chinmaya Mission for a pretty long time. So we all are fully aware, I'm sure, of the Advaita Vedanta because we do go through these classes many times. But sometimes we forget that we also attend some other classes. We do come across some other aspects of Hinduism per se. And it is very important that we distinguish between Advaita and the other darshanas, as they call them, other philosophies, like we can talk about as philosophies. In general, that is a term used, but the Sanskrit term that is used is darshana. Yeah, darshana is some term actually we also use for when we go to temple. We say we take darshan of the Lord, the idol which is there. We got a darshan. Yeah, but darshan is actually seeing, so to say. But when a rishi or a master uh, sees, so to say, darshana, when we call any philosophy a darshana, it is not necessarily seeing per se, but it is complete uh, enhanced understanding of the uh, entire text of Vedanta or text of Hindu philosophy per se. So it includes philosophy, it also includes rituals, it also includes way of life. Every darshana that came out of Hinduism will automatically have all these. So it's not necessarily only philosophy per se. So when we talk about Advaita, not necessarily only we have a philosophy associated, but we have a whole lot of rituals associated. It becomes a way of life for all of us. And it is similar for all other aspects as well, or darshanas which came out of so-called Hinduism, broadly called. Yeah. So obviously there are two main differences among the so-called Hindus. One, we say, are Hindus, those Hindus, they believe in that. Believe in what? Believe that something exists beyond this life. So, and there are a few whom we also call Hindus, they say nothing is beyond this life. So, for Charvaka philosophy, what we call, or right now, I think modern sciences fall into that category, where there is no requirement for any God or anything. It automatically happens because of the very nature of the creation is as such. So they don't require an Ishvara to sustain, so to say. So Charvak philosophy, we call them atheist in general in English language, theism and atheism. But really speaking, atheism is not necessarily what Charvakas are telling, because theism and atheism is belief in God and belief not in God, kind of. Whereas where we are looking at from Charvaka philosophy, for example, is those people among Hindus who don't believe anything exists beyond this life. We have taken birth, we are dead, body is gone, I am gone, that is end of the subject. Many people nowadays actually may be believing in that particular philosophy you see, rather than believing in any one particular religion per se, including Hinduism. Very important for us from the perspective of our understanding. There are six major philosophies. I will use philosophy, I will not use darshana per se, but please substitute with darshana whenever you hear the word of philosophy. There are six major philosophies which came out of Hinduism as we speak right now. One is obviously called Nyaya philosophy, means it is based on pure logic. So they believe in logic. Initially, logicians or Nyaya philosophers didn't require a Ishvara in their philosophy per se. So original texts of Nyaya, if you see, there is absolutely no mention of any Ishvara, Bhagavan, nothing, no requirement. Similar to the modern science. They believe that there is something called a Anu. Anu is broadly translated as atom before, but now that we know atom can also be further divided, there are minute particles than atom. It doesn't fit into the definition of Anu of Nyaya philosophy, which says Anu as something which cannot be further divided, whatever that particular aspect is. Yeah. So this particular thing, Anu, will automatically then becomes a building block for the entire creation to come about, both inert as well as Jiva. Everything came out of that Anu is how Nyaya philosophers have come out with. And we do here a similar one, if not 100% matching, is the modern science is more or less follows a similar philosophy per se. There is one more philosophy very important for Advaita point of view, because Advaita philosophy heavily depends or borrowed its teachings from Sankhya philosophy. So this word Sankhya is a dualistic philosophy. We must understand Sankhya is not Advaita philosophy, but Shankaracharya has taken quite a lot of that creation process per se from this Sankhya philosophy. He calls Kapila Muni, who is the originator of Sankhya, as Kapila Bhagwan. So he gives the status of a Bhagwan to him, means Guru, but at the same time he says, sorry, I disagree with you. You are wrong in certain aspects, and that is where Advaita philosophy comes into picture. So that particular aspect we must all remember, that each one of us require to keep that mind open. Whatever the philosophy you are bringing in, it must be your philosophy or our philosophy. It must be our philosophy that will ultimately make sense to you. Yeah. But what we in Chinmaya Mission follow is pure Advaita as Shankara taught. Whether we understand it fully or not at this particular point of time, hopefully we will be understanding, because I think over a period of time now, more than 1,000 to 2,000 years, they say, I'm not sure, although Shankaracharya is supposed to have taken avatar in 700, around that particular 700 to 800 CE, but some of the things actually say that he is much older than that. We don't know. Yeah, but it doesn't matter really when it is, because it makes no difference to us whether he took birth in 700 BC or 500 BCE. Doesn't matter. Yeah, but over a period of time, Shankara's teachings have stood the test of time, so to say. Yeah? Although there are other things who have come later on, like Vaiseshika or Visishtadvaita of Ramanujacharya, has come out with a slightly different understanding of this Advaita philosophy of Shankaracharya. Brief example for Visishtadvaita is, if you take a tree, for example. Yeah? So a tree has got a branch, a leaf, a flower, a fruit. All of them, they are distinctly different. When you see these things, leaf looks different, it feels different, it is different from the bark or root of the tree. But when we call it a tree, it is one tree. We don't distinguish when we refer to as the tree. Similarly, what Ramanujacharya said is, although you have differences in terms of creation, like Jiva, inert world, Jagat, and Ishvara, for example, but they are all like the entire tree is Advaita, whereas these are distinct. So he is actually brought in a slightly different way of dualism, but he calls it as Visishtadvaita. That's why it is called unique Advaita. Not really Advaita, but unique Advaita. They're all one and the same, but they are different at the same time. Means what? The Jiva Jagat aspects of the creation are equally real, like pure Ishvara or Brahman. They're all real. That is how Visishtadvaita has come into picture later on. There was yoga philosophy. I'm sure many of us are very, very familiar with that, because we have read in few of the texts as well. Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali Maharshi is a philosophy plus it's a way of life again. Like I said, it's a darshan. Although we call it philosophy, but it has got a complete living process when we talk about these darshanas. Similar to Advaita, yoga by itself is a different philosophy. And when it comes to yoga, we really don't go into whether it is dualistic philosophy or Advaitic philosophy, but mainly the ultimate result of yoga will be Advaita. Once you achieve that samadhi state per se, you become Brahman, so to say. Yeah, it gives you more practical aspects is described in yoga, and similarly, our Shankaracharya has picked up many aspects from yoga as well. So confusion will be there because all these have come from the same source, what we call as Veda. Now, Veda, if we ask you how many Vedas are there, normal answer is 4 Vedas. Everybody knows, yeah, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharvana Veda. But really speaking, these 4 Vedas have been divided in as such by Veda Vyasji quite later. Whereas the Veda existed forever. We call that as it is Anadi. Anadi means timeless. It is there since the creation, it is there. Only people will come and pick it up from time to time. If people are not there, it will go back. But Veda exists right from the very start. Yeah? So whole Veda was there. Then Veda Vyasji came into picture in Dwapara Yuga, when Mahabharata time is there. Sri Krishna's contemporary he is the one, they say, has split the Veda into 4. And out of compassion, he did that because he knew that Kali Yuga is coming. And they say that the capacity of humankind is going to reduce. People cannot learn the entire Veda. So he split that into 4 and allocated that to different groups for them to maintain the originality and efficacy of that particular section of the Veda. So this became into 4 Vedas per se, but entire thing is Vedas only. And each Veda again is split into 4. One is called Samhita. Samhita is purely mantra aspect of it. Mantras describing the nature, describing gods, etc., etc. Mantras associated is called Samhita. And there is another portion called Brahmana. This Brahmana is related to the ritual ceremonies, sacrifices, etc., whatever are there. That section of Veda is called Brahmana. And the third one is called Aranyaka. Now, Aranyaka again is associated with certain ritualistic aspects of it, but more contemplation associated with why those rituals are being done, etc. So Aranya means forest. So Aranyaka per se means those aspects which we are expected to contemplate on in a situation, in a position where least amount of disturbance is there for us. That is how the Aranyaka word comes into picture. So when we are in a state where we want to contemplate, meditate, etc., the idea of the word Aranya per se, Rana means war. War means what? Actually, it's not really war, but the sound associated with the war. So Rana means when war is going on, it used to be a huge noise compared to normal life in those days. Swords and horses and elephants shouting, conches going on. So there used to be a lot of sound associated with war. So war is called Rana in Sanskrit. Aranya, means it is negating. So where there is least amount of sound, that is Aranya. So we call forest as Aranya because normally it is very quiet compared to a city or a town. So Aranya becomes a forest from that perspective. But where least amount of sound is there is Aranya. So this Aranya, when we talk about from the perspective of our sadhana or learning, Aranya means not external sound only, but definitely it is where least amount of noise is there internally with us. A person may go to top of Himalayan mountain where there is absolutely no sound. But if his inner sound is much more, where he is keeps on thinking, he or she keeps on thinking about what he left or she left and came to those Himalayas. Too much sound is, internal sound is there. So when we call about Aranya, remember it is mostly important when we go into Aranya, means that particular aspect, we must have very little inner noise as well. So one must cultivate a very little thought process when we go into such lifestyle as such. So this is called Aranyaka. And most important for us is Upanishad, is the fourth aspect of the Vedas, built into Aranyakas, but sometimes they are in Brahmanas, they are in Samhitas, everywhere you will find them. Upanishad is purely a knowledge-based aspect of that particular Veda. So Veda has got these four aspects, and what we learn in any of our texts is the Upanishadic portion and the associated thoughts that are built into that particular aspect of the Veda. And Veda is very, very huge in terms of volume. Upanishads out of that form very minute portion of those Vedas. And you can imagine it is so difficult for anybody to really arrive at which section is the Upanishad. That unfortunately our rishis and gurus have already identified, and there are roughly 108 Upanishads that have survived till now. And these 108 are right now available. Out of them, 10 of these Upanishads, 11 if you can take it, if you one more at least which have come out, is these are called major Upanishads. Not major in terms of any extra content. Content is always Brahman. Any Upanishad, subject is Brahman, content is Brahman. Yeah. And what is the nature of the Brahman? Comparatively, what is the nature of the Jiva? And how I can reach that particular stage is how what Upanishads will teach. All Upanishads. Only language is different, examples are different, Guru is different, Sishya is different, etc. But basically, the content remains the same of all the Upanishads. Then why these 10 or 11 are major is because the masters have commented about that. So you have commentaries available on this 10 or 11 of Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhavacharya. Doesn't matter, maybe what they tell is slightly different based on the philosophy they are preaching. So for example, Ramanujacharya, when he preaches Bhagavad Gita, for example, his commentaries are different in line with what his philosophy is. So Advaita, that Visishta Advaita philosophy will be there in Ramanujacharyya's comment. So when you talk about the latest one, Prabhupada's this one commentary, purely dualistic perspective. So when you read this particular commentary of Prabhupada, Bhagavad Gita as it is, many of us have that book in our libraries. Remember, that is not exactly what Chinmaya ji is preaching. The text is the same, verses are the same, but commentary is purely based on the philosophy that he is preaching. Yeah. Similarly, when we talk about Chinmaya ji's commentary, purely on Advaita basis, you will find that particular commentary is there. So keep it in mind when you take out any book. Doesn't mean that Bhagavad Gita is Bhagavad Gita. No, there are certain variations in terms of philosophies, and what we are trying to learn here is Advaita philosophy as per Shankaracharya and as propounded by Chinmaya Swami Gurudev in Chinmaya Mission as well. Yeah. So the six, as I mentioned, Visishtadvaita, Nyaya, Sankhya, Yoga, and there is Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Purva means first portion. So that Purva Mimamsa is mostly ritualistic basis. Whatever is there, that becomes a philosophy by its own. So people who are dedicating their lives only for the rituals. So there are some people who do that, and that is part of Hindu philosophy. And it is a tradition, as I said, that's why it may not be a philosophy per se, but includes the way of life. So people who are doing only Chandi Yagam, this Yagam, that Yajna, completely life dedicated to only ritualistic way of thinking and living per se. And last but not the least, which we follow, is Vedanta or Uttara Mimamsa. Means it is, Mimamsa is actually to say analysis you are doing. So this Uttara Mimamsa and Purva Mimamsa are the two aspects which we are looking at. And Advaita is the Uttara Mimamsa that we look at. Okay? Apart from this, just to conclude this particular topic per se, there are certain religions, so-called religions, came out of Hinduism as well. Okay? Like, for example, Buddhism, Jainism, those aspects which are there, they actually are not even treated as astika from that perspective, from Advaita and these philosophies perspective, when we look at it. Why so? Because Buddhism, Jainism, etc., they don't require a Ishvara. They don't require any God per se for them to exist. Although they are asti, because there is a, in Buddhism, for example, there is a rebirth. Buddha also comes again and again. When we look at it, there is a rebirth associated with this, means there is something beyond this body and this birth that we are looking at in Buddhism. However, they don't require a Ishvara for doing that. They say that karma philosophy itself is good enough to do everything. Unlike Vedanta, which says that this entire creation is made up of three entities. One is Ishvara, second is Jiva, and third is Jagat. Three entities make up this entire creation. Jagat is purely a inert aspect. Jiva is a subtle, intelligent aspect, but for expression requires a inert body. Not only one, but even mind is inert from that perspective. We will see that when we go into this particular text per se. Yeah. But Jiva is kind of a mix. For the expression to be there, you require body. Without body, you cannot express and do work in this world. However, Ishvara is something who is purely an intelligent aspect, which is there, also forming part of the creation per se, but totally intelligent and has no delusion. That is how the Ishvara is defined in Advaita Vedanta. Now, in these Buddhism and Jainism, that aspect of creation is completely ignored. In the sense, they say that it's not required and is not there. So that we, in Vedanta, people actually call Buddhism, Jainism, etc. as Pakhanda Shastra. Khanda means division or part. Pakhanda means actually it is only part of the knowledge is given as if it is full. So that is how Shankaracharya described Buddhism, and he toured across length and breadth of India to squash Buddhism out of India. It survived everywhere, but wherever Shankaracharya went, those days actually people used to be with open mind and they used to engage in debates, and whoever won the debate, the other person started following the guru whoever has defeated their own guru, for example. Yeah? And somehow Shankaracharya was able, because he is a avatara. That's why we consider him as avatar of Shiva directly. Shankara directly, who has taken birth to retain and sustain and bring back the glory of Hinduism at that particular time when he came, when the Buddhism was on a peak everywhere, they say. There are different versions, but we need not go into that, all that. Yeah. So these Pakhanda Shastras, as I mentioned, why it is important? Again, we get exposed to many talks, many of these philosophies. We come across people who follow them and they talk as well. Nothing wrong in that, because what they are teaching at least is not something totally wrong. Only we say is it is not fully correct. So keep that in mind whenever you come across these different philosophies that are there, it's absolutely okay to hear, but keep that in mind that they can be different from Advaita that is being taught and that is taught by Gurudev Chinmayananda, as we talk about. Yeah, these are broadly when we talk about. So when we see this, you will see that all of these six, when we talk about, we talked about this as one is called Advaita philosophy, Dvait, and second is called Dvaitam. What is this Dvaitam and Advaitam? Is Dvaita is when you consider the creation is as real as the creator. When creator and creation are of same nature, same reality, if one is giving, it becomes a Dvaita philosophy. That means I am also equally as real as the creator, or the Ishvara you can call, or Brahman you can call. Any one of them. Slight difference between them, but we can treat them as same because Ishvara is full of jnanam. He doesn't have any delusion, so he's as good as Brahman, for example. Whereas in Advaita philosophy of Shankaracharya, there is a slight difference in terms of the reality associated with this one. And he introduced, they say he introduced, but some of these texts do have this word called mithya. So Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Creation is mithya and the creator is Brahman, Satyam. That is the truth. How we can understand this difference? Because again, when you talk about illusion, delusion, etc., these English words carry certain meaning to us in our head, and we will then say, but I don't think this is an illusion. Every day I am getting up, my pain is real, my joy is real, my suffering is real, everything is definitely real. And the same people I wake up to in the morning when I get up. So absolutely I can't treat this as an illusion. If it is an illusion, it should disappear. Why it is coming again and again, and there is a reality associated? We may feel like that because the illusion word. So mithya cannot be translated directly. So mithya can only be translated in the definition that is given by Shankaracharya as neither it is sat nor it is asat. So when we talk about illusory world, etc., that is asat, means it is not there at all. But he says, no, 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 it is there, definitely. Neither it is sat nor it is asat. When I cannot describe and define that as either of them, that is where the term mithya will come in. Best way to understand this mithya term is through one simple example, which we can go through. And that particular thing is, again, we can go back to Shankaracharya's example only and say that when a lump of gold is there, now gold has got a reality. Lump of gold is there, gold has got a reality. Now, out of this lump of gold, the goldsmith has created, for example, 10 bangles, 2 earrings, and 10 chains, etc. Now, gold has gone, completely gone. Now, what is left? What is left is the ornaments with name and form. So I have 10 bangles, 2 chains, and 2 earrings. And the gold aspect is now kind of hidden from us. But really speaking, if you take back these 10 bangles to the goldsmith and try to sell those bangles and say that I want to sell these 10 bangles, but I want to retain the gold, you can't do that. Because the name and form that bangle has got is nothing but a part of that lump of gold where it came from. So really, bangle then, does it exist? Of course it exists. It has got a utility, it has got a capacity, it has got a size, it has got a shine, it has got the capacity to give you joy and sorrow. Everything is there within that small, what we refer to as bangle or chain. But really speaking, the truth is not the chain or bangle. The truth is when you go back to sell these 10 bangles, for example, to your goldsmith, he doesn't see bangle in that. He will simply weigh and he will see only gold. He doesn't see this bangle at all. So then the bangle, did it exist? Of course it did. But is that the true nature of that bangle? No, true nature of that bangle is gold. Similarly, when we talk about this particular creation, when we call that as mithya, don't say that it doesn't exist, because bangle did exist whenever, till the time it is there, it did exist as a name and form. But really speaking, it doesn't have a truth of its own. Similarly, they say this entire jivatvam which is there exists because of the upadhi, means the shape and size that is there. That is the upadhi. You have that particular aspect. Similarly, we can give example of space. Space is all pervasive, whereas if you take a small pot associated with the 5-liter pot, 2-liter pot, 1-liter pot, has got its own utility, its own size, its own dimension, etc. And the space of that is is defining the pot, really speaking. But once the upadhi of pot is broken, what happens to the space? Is it going anywhere? It was always part of the overall space, and it continues to remain as part of the space, but appear to be different for a specific period of time as long as the walls of the pot existed. Imagine now your own body and mind associated with this particular consciousness, what we call it as Brahman, because Brahman is defined as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. And Jnanam in practical terms is defined as consciousness. That's why knowledge we call that, yeah. But that is consciousness, means your ability to gain the knowledge is the knowledge we talk about when we say this. So similarly, the consciousness is all pervading, but it appears to exist in you, in my body and mind. It becomes an intrinsic part of this, like the space has become intrinsic part of the pot, which defined the pot to say that it is a 1-liter pot and it can only have 1 liter of liquid. However, when you pour a solid, it becomes slightly less because of the nature of the substance inside. So it has got a utility, it has got a definition when it was there, when it exists. But once it is gone, really speaking, space cannot be defined by pot. It is the pot can be defined by the space. What is limiting is pot is the limiting factor, not the space per se. But definition of pot is what? It is always defined in terms of space only. So what is my true nature in terms of consciousness? I am defining myself as me, but that me is this body and mind. And body and mind in what terms? In terms of consciousness. Once the body's consciousness is gone, then people will get worried. They will admit directly into the hospital. And if the same consciousness is out of my subtle body, then that is the end of the people will be eager to get rid of you as quickly as possible. Means what? My definition is not this body and mind, but it is the consciousness similar to the space of the pot. However, I am thinking that my definition is actually this body and mind, which I define from the birth to the death. So birth certificate, death certificate will give you. However, my true me is actually not this body and mind, but it is the consciousness that is associated with that. And what Advaita says is this consciousness is one. So Advaita, when we talk about, is one consciousness that is supporting all, like one space is supporting all the pots. There can be million pots created across, but all of them are defined by the very space. But as long as the pot exists, we keep fighting, thinking that I am a 1-liter pot, you are a 5-liter pot, I become jealous of you, etc., etc. All that comes only because of all this. And what we are looking at and what we will be looking at in this particular text is definitely that my true nature is that of Sat Chit Ananda. Yeah. So Satchit Ananda is one aspect in terms of Jiva. The same thing in terms of Brahman will be looked at as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam Brahma. Yeah. So this is the difference only in terms of terminology and our understanding. We will go into those details because this text and the very first chapter which we will be covering starts with this very aspect of Satyam Jnanam Anantam or Satchit Ananda and how it is not different from me. Similar to how the space of a pot is not different from the entire space which is there, all pervading space that we are looking at. They're exactly the same. However, out of my ignorance, I try to define myself in terms of upadhi and not my true nature. Really speaking, without consciousness, for example, can you ever define yourself as a body? Can we define ourselves as mind, intellect, memory? Absolutely nothing will be working as such without that consciousness, that what we call it as Satchidananda or Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Is that particular aspect, if you remember, and this example, if you remember, that is where I think you can clearly understand. But don't go too much by the example of bangle, gold, etc. Because gold, bangle has got a similar reality as we talk about a gold, lump of gold. Because the gold is gold. That's why we are able to sell the bangle back. Yeah. However, Shankaracharya brings in into Advaita aspect, wherein this mithya, although it appears to be a reality as long as it exists, really that is not there at all. So this aspect he brings in by the example, very famous example, you will hear that, I'm sure you must have heard this hundreds and thousands of times, is the Rajju Sarpa or the rope and snake example. So this snake which appears on the rope appears to be existing, and as long as it is existing, you will feel that it is as real as the rope. In fact, rope is not seen at all. So this particular thing continues to be there as long as you are not aware of the existence of the rope per se. But more and more when you try to go into this particular sadhana and try to recognize the rope behind, that is the Brahman behind, you will see that the entire creation, what has come about, is nothing but like a snake. Means the snake and rope example is similar, but not exactly like the lump of gold and bangle example. They're slightly different, you can understand, I'm sure. So there is no existence of snake per se, but we feel it is existing. And more, I think when you read science into quantum physics, etc., we keep hearing as if I'm studying this Advaita Vedanta rather than a physics class. Yeah. So it is similar. What quantum physics is telling is when you see, it appears to be a solid electron, but if you are not seeing, it becomes a wave. Means what? This entire creation is as if it is mithya and heavily dependent on the seer, a drashta, rather than the existence of that particular electron or the entire creation per se as a reality. But we need not go into physics because once we go, there will be too many questions coming. But it appears to be very, very similar to what we are talking about, but in different terminology, I'm sure, which is there associated with that. So with this, I will stop the class and we will go into the text directly from the next class onwards. Yeah. If any questions are there, we can take now. We have got 2 minutes time. You can unmute yourself if.
Shankarji will be starting the text with chapter 1.
Yes, please. We will be, in fact, right now, the plan is to only take chapter 1. But if we are interested, we can go into chapter 2, or we can take up any other text with any other speaker as well. So we will see. But right now, only chapter
1. How many verses should we prepare before the class?
I am not 100% sure, because my way of teaching is it just goes on, and roughly 2 to 3 per class. We can take it that way.
Hari Om, Shankarji.
Hari Om.
Just a little bit curiosity about these philosophies, 6 philosophies. What came first? What is the order of these things? First thing. Second, 1 minute. And second question mine is, where does this this devotion philosophy fall into? Dvaita, I can understand, but in this grouping, there's no mention of that
Bhakti.
What we follow. Yeah.
Absolutely, you're right. Unfortunately or fortunately for us, none of our texts directly give any date per se. So it's very, very difficult for us to say which came first, which came next to start with. But from my understanding, once I read through some of these texts which came through, Purva Mimamsa has come out first to start with, and then came Sankhya, and then came Nyaya, and then Yoga, and Visishta Advaita came kind of even later than Vedanta. Sorry, Visishta Advaita is the last, and Vedanta philosophy, as taught by Shankaracharya, has come after the Yoga, after Sankhya, after Nyaya, and after Purva Mimamsa. And this Vedanta is similar to Uttara Mimamsa. There is no difference between those two. But Visishta Advaita or Vaiseshika came the last with Ramanujacharya. But when I say this with a pinch of salt per se. Yeah. For example, when we say that Vedanta came with Shankaracharya, and that is, I am telling that as a second last, but Vedanta as a philosophy existed for long. What Shankaracharya says is even the, for example, for him, there is a Prasthanatrayi, means Brahma Sutra and Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads form the corner pillar of what he is teaching. Means what? What Vedavyasji wrote in Bhagavad Gita is full of Advaita Vedanta as per Shankaracharya. So whether it is there or not, yes, it was there before, but from our understanding or existence of the text perspective, I think Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta comes the latest in terms of that, and after that, Vaiseshika came. But definitely, it is not something which Shankaracharya created. He said everybody taught the same thing right from the start, but people misinterpreted or started misinterpreting after that, and he corrected already existing understanding. And same, when Ramanujacharya talked about it, he said, this is an existing philosophy. All others got it wrong. I got it right. So we must take that from that perspective. Yeah.
No, I can understand his thing, because as we read and understand that he's considered that he revived Hinduism. He
revived, yeah.
Revived.
So
that right means it had already existed. Then it was not very much common or followed. Then he revived it and he got us into that line.
Correct.
So, and then what I understand, like we have read all these words, I have heard, and Jayaji has explained many times these things. What I think that all these 6 philosophies are going on simultaneously.
Sorry, going on?
Simultaneously, like lots of people follow
yes.
these things. So one can follow not just one philosophy strictly,
Hmm.
as we are just down to earth people, so we can follow at times. We cannot reach to Shankaracharya's status. Maybe
Um,
some other life, I do not know. But in this life, I think I am comfortable with falling to earth.
not necessarily like that. Yeah, we should not give up. We should not give up. It is possible, and when Gurudev is there to take care of us, I think we should have that confidence in him, not on us. If you are left alone, then you are right. If I am left alone, I can never reach. But as long as Gurudev is there to guide us and take us, hopefully he will make sure that we all reach. Yeah, let us take it that way. And your question about bhakti, yeah,
Yes.
similar to that particular aspect which is there, bhakti is not a philosophy by its own, but it is a part of what we call it as sadhana. And that sadhana will include bhakti, it includes meditation, it includes contemplation, etc. And bhakti is something which is in and through, like space is in and through every object. Bhakti is a paramount importance in and through all these six philosophies. Why we call Buddhism as Pakhanda Shastra, for example, is because it takes out that aspect of bhakti. Because Ishvara is not there, God is not there, not required. Karma will take care. So if as long as I am good, I'm reaching that particular aspect is how they look at it, and bhakti kind of is missed in those, and we call that as Pakhanda Shastra. So bhakti is not something which is separate and different. It is in and through all the six philosophies, a requirement for us to understand Ishvara and we revere. But bhakti, again, like Ramana Maharshi has told, it has got different levels of bhakti. Yeah? And best bhakti, as we say, is to understand that I am no different from Ishvara, is the best form of bhakti.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, if nothing else, I think I will close the class.
Hari Om Shankarji.
Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.